Hey everybody, it's Tiffany. I'm a physician assistant and I've worked in internal medicine for about 17 years. And I want to tell you some stuff today about fat cells. So the more we know and understand about fat cells, the more we understand why it's so hard for people to lose weight and keep weight off. So you've actually got about somewhere between 25 and 35 billion fat cells that make up your body. Now, some people, especially people who have been obese for a long time, may have created more fat cells. And once you create a fat cell, there's really no way to ever get rid of it. At least not without some sort of surgery like liposuction. But naturally, even if you lose fat, you're not really getting rid of the fat cell itself. So even when you lose weight, fat cells are actually just shrinking, or if you gain weight, fat cells are growing. You're not really losing the number of fat cells that you have. So most of your fat cells actually grow and divide during adolescence. And so up until the age of about 24 is when you're still creating all your fat cells. And then after about the age of 24, or when adolescence kind of considered to be stopped, then you've got about the set number of fat cells that you're going to have in your body. Now, the average lifespan of a fat cell is about 10 years. And then a fat cell will die, but then your body will quickly replace it. But you're going to have about the same number of fat cells altogether for the rest of your life. Now, depending on how much extra glucose and triglycerides and things that are floating around in your system, your body is going to either swell those fat cells up or potentially shrink them down. So if you can imagine in your brain, what would a bottle of 100 marbles look like versus 100 BBs? Obviously, the 100 BBs is going to be much more compact, whereas 100 marbles is going to look a whole lot more. But still, it's the same number. So that's like 100 fat cells. They can either be really swollen and big or very small and compact. So when people lose weight, we think what happens, you know how sometimes you hit a plateau when you're losing weight and the number on the scale really doesn't change for maybe a couple weeks. It's very frustrating for people. But what we think is happening during those plateaus is that the fat cells are having to kind of redistribute. They've shrunk down and they have to kind of shrink back down. And so during a plateau, sometimes we think that those fat cells are having to kind of redistribute themselves. So sometimes during a plateau, maybe your body size is changing, but not so much the number on the scale. But the number of fat cells never really changes, especially in adulthood. So that's sometimes not a good thing, especially for people who have been overweight or obese for a long time, because those people could have actually created a lot of extra fat cells. So if you go back to the beginning of the video where I said the average person has between 25 and 35 billion fat cells, there can be someone who can have almost to 100 billion fat cells. Now, all those fat cells were created because you had so much excessive amounts of fat that had to be stored. But even when you start losing fat, you've still got 100 billion fat cells sitting there waiting to be filled back up. So let's say you work really hard, you work on dieting, maybe even on some sort of extreme diet. I've seen people do really amazing and they lose 60, 70 pounds on like a restrictive type diet, like a keto diet or something. But then as soon as they try to reintroduce food or carbs or something back into their diet, it's like the weight comes right back on. And part of the reason for that is, especially if you've been obese for a long time, is that you have all those fat cells and they're just sitting there just waiting to reabsorb that fat. Now, we actually kind of think about fat as more of an organ. We call it tissue, but it's in and of itself its own organ because it secretes hormones. And it can actually secrete a hormone to signal you to be hungry or to signal you to be full. So I say all this to say that if you have been obese for a long time, it is very possible that you might need some medical help with getting weight off and keeping it off, because there are lots of things that are working against you for that. And I don't think it's fair that as a provider that we just ask you to diet and exercise and the weight doesn't come off and then we just say, oh, well, sorry, you've done all that you can do. Because now we know so much more about the way fat cells and glucose, how they operate together, and it just doesn't work for people, especially people that have been obese for a long time. So your number of fat cells will never change. They can shrink, they can expand, but they're always going to be there. So sometimes it is really important that we use tools that we have available to us to try to help you shrink down those fat cells and keep them shrunk down. So that's where GLP-1s really do an amazing job, because they actually signal to your fat cells to give away that extra fat and to keep it away, and to use that fat for fuel instead of just putting it away in storage over and over and over again. So if you have more questions about fat cells, or if any of this was interesting to you, then give me a follow, and please send me a message if you have more questions. All right, y'all have a wonderful day.